So I think that I got quite a few things right, but I was a little bit like, oh, well, there hasn't been a massive destruction of the whole country and an ill conceived idea at regime change. But I think we did, which has led to a destruction of cities. But I think we did get right is it was a really shit situation where probably at least 600 people were killed in the past couple of weeks in a completely unnecessary war when there were negotiations that were planned for 2 weeks ago that could easily have solved the enrichment nuclear enrichment problem. Uh, it's created a precedent where we now have the idea that the US and Israel can go in and bomb nuclear sites wherever it wants. It's
And Russia.
probably and Russia.
It's
It
given the
must
green
create.
light. It's given the green light worldwide, presumably.
What do you think Russia will do in terms of reacting to that particular thing? I mean, there's no nuclear sites in. Well, there are nuclear power stations, I suppose, in Ukraine. But what do you mean?
I guess that's what I meant. Although
Yeah.
I imagine there'll be some people that would argue that there are secret nuclear sites in Ukraine because there's secret everything in Ukraine. Some people think.
Yeah.
I've noted that. It's notable that some people think that.
Yeah.
What do I think? Well, I think Russia's winning the war, so it doesn't need to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's my. I think one of
And
the things
Russia wants to continue the war. As we all know, bombing nuclear sites is de-escalating. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I think perhaps what I've.
Oh, yeah, what
Over.
you were wrong about. Well, I kind of was right.
I think
Together we were right. We came to
I'm happy. I'm happy to be wrong because I know that I'm a little bit on edge about.
but together we were right. And that's the main thing. As a
Together we were.
podcast,
Newscum was right.
Newscum was right. Yes, that's the main thing. Newscum is always right. Individuals may fall, but
Yeah.
the system as a whole maintains. So you said that you didn't understand. Well, you didn't understand how there would be a problem in bombing these sites, and we used the classic military simulator Worms. We didn't even have to play it because it's all up here. I have the entire simulator. I can
Yes.
simulate any war in the world through the Worms simulator. You just give me a war and I'll play it out in Worms and tell you what happens. And so we played out the bunker busting. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
And you said,
Yeah.
in Worms, you fire one bomb, you cause a crater, and then you fire another directly
Yeah.
into that crater, and you cause a sort of a second crater further down. And you were like,
Yeah.
that's all they had to do was fire a few of them. And they did fire a few of them. But it turns out it wasn't that simple. And as I said, in Worms, you fire one down, you cause a crater. You attempt to fire the other to the very bottom of that crater, but it never works. It always bounces
Yeah.
off the side. And then the second crater is sort of diagonally. So I think that's what happens.
I'm doing it for the benefit of viewers,
Yeah.
of listeners, because it's a mountainside. So it's like a bunker buster bomb. If it's going to go perpendicular into the ground, then it's going to be it's going to be going to go 60 meters into the earth. That's probably where they tested it out in the Nevada desert and all that. But if it's in the side of a mountain, it might be a bit awkward. And that's
Yeah.
why you've got all these intelligence reports now coming out saying that it hasn't properly destroyed the facility.
And that's what we predicted, sort of, through our dialogue.
through our worms thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Worms particularly, it's really difficult when you're trying to hit the side of a mountain. I don't know if you remember, things would fly off into the water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The other thing about bunker busters is that bombs, so it goes deep into the ground before exploding.
Yeah.
But exploding inside of anything is really difficult. I don't really understand the physics of it, but it's like why people dive on a grenade to save other people, because if something is close to the explosion, it hampers its ability. So I think the bunker busters in general probably aren't as effective as you just imagine that they would just be incredible, because they're these incredibly powerful bombs. But in reality, they're so powerful because underground it barely does anything.
If you've got earth caked in around them, and although I know this sounds really big, but I got an image of the size of these things the other day. They're about the size or at least the weight of a double decker bus. But if you think about if a double decker bus is crushed up.
Wait, how big are those
and
stealth
packed in
planes?
Well, I'm not sure how big they are, but they're the only ones that are strong enough to carry the actual
Because
thing.
they
It's either
carry
the
like
B2 or the.
three, don't they? Or is
It
that not
might
the
have
case?
been one in each. It might have been one in
Okay.
each. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's obviously they are mega heavy and mega huge. But if you think about, I don't really quite know what the size of the actual nuclear facilities are, but I imagine that they are. There must be at least I don't know, a mile wide or whatever, or half a mile wide. It is going to take quite a lot of hits to get that to get that. Anyway, we don't really know because we haven't got the detailed intelligence. It doesn't even look like the Trump has got it at the moment. He's just like, yeah, it's been done. It's not going to be a problem for years now.
Yeah, well, Trump's. I mean, it's funny because Trump, on the one hand, probably is full of shit, but he's lying in order to try and keep the ceasefire.
Yes,
Whereas the CIA, whoever's actually done the satellite imagery of it, probably telling the truth. But at the same time, the reason that they leaked it, right? I think to CNN
I
or
think there's some
someone did.
contradictory reports because I think CIA have said that the attacks were
Oh, right.
successful in taking it out, but then another part of the intelligence community has said otherwise. And I think everyone's kind
Again,
of
we
waiting to see
predicted this. I was
what the
talking last time about conspiracies, different parts of the deep state fighting against each other amongst themselves. It's all
Very
in
good.
Newscum. It's all in last week's
Well
episode.
done. That's the only news source that you need. All suckers out there. The only news source. If you're listening, if you want some flip flopping opinions based on based on
Based on half remember
Com-
things from watching
from Commodore
CCTV
64, yeah, and Commodore
and
64
yeah, war
analogies.
simulations on Commodore. I played Worms on Amiga actually.
Yeah,
Maybe it was
yeah,
more
I think it was a
accurate.
PC. Yeah, yeah, it, prefigured the 4-hour nuclear attacks more effectively than the Commodore
So,
64
but
versions.
someone leaked it, right? Leaked this report that they hadn't blown up the bunkers.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably Iran knew about these bombs and tried to make the facility
Yeah, yeah. I think that was the whole point that they
bomb-proof.
built.
Yeah.
They built the bombs I think in the earlier Obama administration. I don't know if they've been probably testing them in the deserts for years, but
All right.
the Americans, and then the Iranians built the Fordow facility. Oh, I don't know, but I think it was around about the same time. So I mean, they're all reacting against each other like that, and they built
And
it like 90 meters down, didn't they?
they also
And
said
the
that
bombs can go.
they probably took everybody out and they may have a more secretive base
Yeah,
than that
and even
one.
if they don't have a more secretive base, they may have at least taken out the necessary centrifuges and uranium to make bombs. So, I mean, I think that's what we were worried about. Certainly, what I was worried about was that they could, if there is a full scale war that had developed there, which involved attacks on civilians in Tehran, and there were some attacks on Tehran, but my mate's brother-in-law had a windows blown in Tehran and had to move out to the villages outside Tehran, for example. So there was a bit of that going on. But I think what we were concerned about is if this turned into a full-scale war, you could easily imagine the Iranian regime desperate, trying to build a nuclear weapon, which they could probably have in a matter of weeks. Who knows if they might smuggle it to terrorists, or if they might just sort of unveil it somehow to say to Israel, stop attacking, else we're going to use this in some way or another. And that really could have put a hell of a lot of heat into the situation. And then the other concern, but that hasn't happened, but maybe I'm not sure if it might. Certainly Iran, you'd have thought, would be definitely talking about whether they're going to make a bomb of some kind. But then the other issue was, will Iran attack America's bases in the Middle East? And of course they did, but to such a weak extent that it didn't actually lead to escalation, which I was quite surprised at. And I think similarly with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, I thought that the conventional wisdom was that those things were going to happen. That was quite commonly said. I've just been watching a podcast with the trigonometry one with Konstantin Kisin and Glenn Greenwald. And Glenn Greenwald, this was recorded just before Trump declared the ceasefire, and Greenwald was saying, well, there's obviously going to be attacks on American bases. Everyone accepts that. And then, of course, there kind of was, but not to the extent that it escalated anything. So I think
Yeah, but it didn't escalate because Trump could have used that if you wanted to escalate it.
If he'd wanted to, but he didn't. So that suggests to me that although Trump is perhaps more bellicose than we might have hoped, given that only 6 months ago he was saying we want to halve global military spending, which sounds rather pie in the sky now. At least he does seem to have the nous to not want to get into a never-ending escalation, and that was it. Very interesting when he did do the these guys don't know what the fuck they're doing. That was the first time really I've seen him slap down Israel. I mean, he did it in the context of slapping down Iran, but I've never really seen an American president say, Israel, they're basically turn your fucking planes around, wave out the window to your chums in Iran, and shut the fuck up, basically. And that's quite encouraging. I mean, I know that what Trump is doing is unnecessary. It could all have been fixed 2 weeks ago with simple negotiations. So all he's really doing is almost play acting as a leader, but at least he's acting as a leader.
Well, okay, so this is probably a good moment to times. But I mean, one of the things that so the argument against it, right, is that a lot of Trump's base is anti-war. And a lot of the rhetoric that he came out with before the election was to try and stop all of this gallivanting around the world. But his evidence was in his first term, how influenced he was by the Israeli lobby. And he was very influenced by it, right? I mean, first you've got the killing of, killing of Qasem Soleimani. Yeah?
Soleimani.
Yeah, Soleimani or Soleimani.
Soleimani.
And then you've got the moving of the Israeli embassy. That was a massive thing. That no other administration. Obviously, the Democrats are very pro-Israel, but they'd never done something like this. And then you got all the weird stuff about those people that were very close to Trump, who were often visiting the White House. I can't remember their names now, but sort of very high up in the Israeli lobby, very rich individuals. And everybody kind of knew that.
Miriam.
Right? Miriam.
And I can't remember the others, but yeah.
She's like Madonna. Just Miriam.
Yeah. Dear Miriam.
Yeah. But anyway, and everybody kind of knows that stuff. But it was kind of dismissed in the lead up to this election, how influenced he was by the Israeli lobby. I mean, partly I think it was because no one thought it could get any worse in the Middle East, which was foolish, to say the least. If there's one place things can get worse, it's the Middle East. So that was very much dismissed. I also think a lot of people now who were always very anti-Trump, mostly coming from a sort of Democrat position or a centrist position, are saying, well, you see how he's mishandling all this stuff? I mean, things have changed so much every day. Maybe they're not saying that now that there's a ceasefire, but maybe 2 days ago they were saying that. But, overall, this kind of catastrophe and stuff. But the thing about them, those people, is no one was complaining that Trump was going to escalate the war in the Middle East. They were talking about ending democracy, the taking away of civil liberties, and all that stuff. To some degree, you can argue the case for that. But there was no warning about this because Biden was, doing a shitter as it was in that field. So they didn't want to talk about it anyway. So I don't really buy into that. But I do think there is some criticism for, not myself, obviously, but probably you, and certainly a lot of people who were sort of on the anti-war left or just sort of anti-war in general, supporting of Trump, who dismissed a lot of the Israeli stuff. And I think partly just in hope that there was a candidate that was anti-war, and also partly because they just hated the Dems. And I can appreciate that. I think there was a lot of tacit support for Trump just because of the way the Democratic Party had treated, what's his face? Bernie Sanders.
Oh, Bernie Sanders. Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Going back to...
So there was like a want for the Democrats to be punished for that. And even if they wouldn't have voted for Trump or didn't endorse Trump, they enjoyed the pain of the Democratic Party was feeling. We have 10 minutes left of this free Zoom call. What a professional operation this is. So,
yeah, go on.
His main argument for why there would be a war was that everybody, including Iran, was up for it. And he goes through the motivations of each of the main players, which are Saudi Arabia.
Including Iran.
Did I stutter? I mean, I do stutter a lot, but I don't think I did then. Got Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran, the US. And by the US, you mean everybody else. Germany, France, Britain. All the fucking lemmings that follow them off the cliff. Right? So they're all up for the war. And Iran is up for the war. Now, why is Iran up for the war? That's probably his weakest argument, to be fair. Mainly it's revenge. I mean, as the leader of the revenge party, I can completely understand that. But I don't know if Iran is really up for completely destroying themselves. But, he thinks that Iran thinks they can win. And maybe they can. And he talks a lot about the sort of psychology of that. And the fact that if Iran did win, I mean, here's the wager. Iran could win. Well, if
Iran did win, it could win.
Yeah, if you accept that Iran could win, first thing, and then you say, well, maybe let's just say hypothetically it did win. That's assuming that it could, which it might not be able to. But if it could and it did, that might be the end of the US as a force, as a sort of worldwide
pain in the arse,
right? Because it would mean sort of Vietnam, but on a much bigger scale at a time when the US politically, internally, is not able to function as it is, never mind with that kind of thing on it. And secondly, it being weaker in terms of economically, it's already weaker, and the military spending that it has right now is very difficult to maintain. And if it's sucked into this war, the other thing will be that other players will then come forward. I mean, his idea about why Russia invaded Ukraine was that it was a challenge to US supremacy. Which is, it's an interesting. He's very convincing.
They always say that, though. Yeah.
But I think But I think it's more nuanced than that. Of course, I would say that there is lots of reasons why Russia was kind of forced into a position to act in some way. And I think most people would say that the invasion was the wrong thing to do, but it's like rock and hard place. It's similar with the Hamas attack. Now, details of that attack you might disagree with. A lot of the details of that attack were made up. But generally, attacking the Israeli defenses is completely justified under international law on the one hand. And secondly, what else was Hamas going to do at that particular point? Taking of the hostages, that kind of thing.
Sausages.
Okay. Sausages, the eating of sausages. Anyway, but say the same thing, right, about Russia, right, the invasion, right? They were kind of forced into it, but at the same time, the fact that they were able to do it, the fact that they felt they could do it, this is his idea, is that he felt that Putin made a gamble that he could do it and win because the US was weaker than it had once been. And maybe there's some truth to that, maybe not. I mean, certainly it looks like Russia could win and will. And if Russia could win, and they did win, then that would, but I mean, anyway, getting back, so his idea about Iran is that. Now, his idea is just that Iran wants revenge. But I guess, implied is also Iran wants the US to be out of the Middle East. And so if they could win a war, which they think they can, and then they did, that would see the US withdrawing, particularly from that part of the world. I mean, this is the idea.
Yeah, I know the idea. It's just not very realistic.
His idea is that it will become a ground war. This is the thing. The US can win the war, but if it becomes a ground war, they'll probably lose, and it'll become a Vietnam, and they will actually draft soldiers, or attempt to. There'll be an attempt to draft soldiers, and that will cause such civil strife domestically in the US.
Well, that's one of the things that was worrying me in general, is I can't see how there can be a ground war, because there's nowhere to land any troops.
Right,
there's nowhere to bring any... So this is my concern, has always been, in fact, even going back to when this idea of bombing Iran was first seriously discussed in 2007, 2008, you can't really have a ground invasion. So there's not even, I mean, obviously it would be horrendous to do that, but it's almost more, the situation is almost more liable to end up with bigger bombs or even nuclear weapons, because it can only really be an air war, because the Americans can't put ground troops in anywhere. So it just has to be bomb, 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 bomb,
he has an answer for that as well. He says that what Putin will do early on is say that there can be no nukes involved. If nukes are involved, then Russia will get involved, and that Putin will play that against the US. So the US will be trapped into conventional warfare, and he just thinks the asymmetrical warfare of Iran has a good chance of willing out. Now, the thing about all this is like, yes, it's all very stupid, but it's premised on the idea that this war is wanted. This war is wanted by a lot of people in the US, and if it's also wanted by Iran, and it's obviously wanted by a lot of people in Israel, then you can see the sort of logic of that playing out, despite people not wanting it, including Trump. So this is the craziest bit, right? Is his idea of Trump's motivations. So he thinks that Trump wants to end he is like completely sincere in his wanting to destroy the deep state, but primarily to destroy the kind of democratic global elite oligarchy that's rejected him and scuppered his plans to win in 2020 and all that. He wants revenge on them. He wants to destroy US empire, basically.
Yeah.
But he'll do that through giving them what they want, which is a war with Iran. And so what he'll do is, and it's funny because he said all of this last year, and some of it he's got wrong a bit, some of it he hasn't. But what's played out in the last few days has been Trump on the one hand escalating what's going on, but on the other hand seeming not to, and rhetorically not to, and looking as if, and even though of course the US are in full control of what Israel is doing, and as you said, like they could have stopped Israel, but they didn't stop Israel. But it looks like they wanted to stop Israel, but they didn't. And it's this weird thing that's going on where Trump looks like he's trying to get a ceasefire, but every day it just doesn't work out. It gets worse and worse. It's very strange, right?
He actually had an analogy for it yesterday. Well, when the head of NATO called him daddy, did you see what the context of that was?
No.
Donald Trump was saying Iran and Israel are like two toddlers fighting, and you can't just go in there and stop them fighting immediately because they need to get it out of their system. You've got to let them fight for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you drag them away from each other. I mean, it's very old school.
That's a great point. We're gonna have to leave it on that, Matt, because we've got less than a minute. So I don't know. It was giving